Hey, Troy.
Hey, Jordan.
All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Divulgence. I'm very excited for our next guest. He is a author and co-author of three books that deal with aspects of the electric universe model and its subset Saturn theory. These are some topics that I'm new to, but I've heard a few podcasts on them, and I've seen a few different books and whatnot about them, and it's definitely got my attention going. So I'm very excited to have him on to start peeling the onion on some of these topics. So his books that he's written are The Saturn Death Cult. He's also written Cosmos in Collision with Ted Holden, and his most recent book is The Purple Dawn of Creation. So everyone, can you please help me welcome Troy McLaughlin? Hey, Troy, how are you?
Great to be with you.
Awesome. I'm so happy for you to be here. So thanks again for your time.
All my pleasure. Shows like this that guys like me need to have. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, not a problem. Not a problem. I'm very excited. Very excited to get the ball rolling on these topics. Again, I'm quite new to them. Like I said, I've read a little bit of your newest book, just a little bit here and there, just to get a little bit of an idea of some of the topics. And yeah, it blew me away a little bit. So I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not sure where to even start on this. So you're the expert. You've written the books. So what we're dealing with here is, if I'm not mistaken, we're dealing with, from a general sense, this Saturn death cult, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Does it have anything to do with what I hear about this black cube of Saturn?
As related, I mean, certainly I provide
Okay.
what I think are explanations for how that comes about. Without a doubt, it's part of the overall equation that goes into this whole concept of a Saturn death cult, as I have dubbed it, as cultural phenomenon. This has its origins in mythology and also in cosmic history.
It's very interesting stuff. So, I mean, I know it's not something that I don't think it would be something you just see in a history book or a regular school textbook or something. But how did
Yeah.
you stumble into this stuff?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's true. I've often, you mentioned my co-author, Ted Holden. I've often said to him that we're the fringe of the fringe when it comes to a lot of this kind of thinking. Of course, the idea of marrying a total reworking of cosmology with what a lot of people would often refer to as conspiracy theory, that's, and particularly things to do with the occult, that's fairly unique, and it takes a lot of explanation. So it's not a subject that is being delved into by many people in the alternative research history and so on. But I first really, you asking me where I got involved in writing these kinds of books, I get asked that quite a lot, and I often just give the answer that it started when I was at university. I was studying Egyptology, and I came across the workings of the works of Immanuel Velikovsky, who wrote the seminal Worlds in Collision book back in the 1950s, which caused a firestorm of controversy in the science world because of his idea that there had been interplanetary interactions within the memory of human existence, and that these interactions can be discerned through looking at mythology. And I stumbled across this, and I looked at the books, and the book had been personally signed by Velikovsky that I found in the library with a note to my professor of Egyptology. And I went along to just simply innocently ask him what the situation was. And that guy went from a very approachable, very nice bloke to suddenly turning on a dime and basically shutting down the whole thing. I don't do Velikovsky, he said 3 times, more forcefully each time. And that was the end of that conversation. And all that did was just simply decide, right, I'm going to have a look into this. It was a sort of, when you're that age, you decide that anything that pisses off the authorities might be worth looking into. So
Absolutely.
I followed that kind of thinking, which is the genesis of what becomes the electric universe and Saturn theory and so on like that. And that's what I usually answer people when they say what got me into writing books now. But I was giving some thought to this before we came online, and there is another aspect to this that I've never really spoken about, which was just and basically I was always an old Hollywood film buff, And I would later
Nice.
become involved in the television and film industry, especially when I got to Hong Kong in 1993. And I was able to take part in a number of productions there. Fantastic fun, had a great time. But over time, looking at, because of the historical side of my interest in Hollywood itself, which is simply the whole concept of filmmaking as an art, I'd noticed a change taking place in the film industry, especially where it related to the stuff that Hollywood was starting to put out there as Hollywood itself. I couldn't at first put my finger on it, but eventually I realized that there was a definite transhumanist trend in the narrative of many modern films that was coming out post 1990. And it was one that was definitely engaging in a kind of social engineering that was sort of geared towards painting a picture of human existence as a blight on the planet. And there was also other stuff that sort of had started to irk me, that I'd noticed without realizing what I was watching. I mean, for instance, why was Captain Kirk always getting it on with every female of the alien species in the miniskirt and such? There was that sort of trans-species sort of look, that chimeric approach to sort of interspecial relationships and so on. But it wasn't until I came across the work of a guy called Jay Weidner and his take on what was going on in the films of Stanley Kubrick. And that was when the penny finally dropped. And I realized that the entertainment industry had largely been hijacked to initiate sort of world populations into concepts of transhumanism. And what I started to see was an agenda focused on world depopulation. And it was largely, I give credit to Jay Weidner, because I'd known about Saturn theory, all right, and it's linked to ancient mythology and the idea of what happened in the past with interplanetary catastrophes and so on. But I'd never made the connection to the modern world in terms of how it may still be influencing things today. And it was Jay Weidner's work with Stanley Kubrick that made me realize that there was an element of this Saturn mythology, the Saturn archetype, Saturn god archetype at play in the entertainment industry. And from there, I developed the idea that became the Saturn Death Cult book. And basically, it takes the concept of Saturn theory, which is the idea that the planet Earth was, and not in the too distant past. It was originally a satellite of the planet Saturn, when Saturn was a free-floating brown dwarf star. And that this brown dwarf star and its satellites, including Earth, were catastrophically captured by the sun. And this resulted in a massive change of fortunes for the human population on Earth at that time. This is the wild idea that these events happened during corporate human memory. And the subsequent cosmic fireworks of Saturn's capture by the sun turn out to, according to this theory, to be the basis of virtually all origin myths involving Saturn, the Saturn god archetype, and the destructive doomsday archetype associated with the mythical god Saturn. So unfortunately, since that time of Saturn's capture and Earth's separation from Saturn as where Saturn was Earth's original life-giving sun, according to mythology, that mythology that has been passed down to us has been steadily obfuscated. It's been distorted from its original role as a record of past interplanetary and catastrophes. And it's largely, mythology has been turned into a form of control mechanism where self-appointed elites who would seek to monopolize the productive efforts of the majority of peoples for the benefits of an elite minority have been able to use Saturn archetypes as a way of triggering psychological responses in a traumatized corporate, the greater part of humanity, as it would be said. In essence, so I argue in the book that where things relate to us in today, I connect all of this up to the advent of the central banking model of international debt-based finance as the culmination of a centuries-long agenda by connected elites aimed at, this idea of securing global control over world resources, and their ability to do it through this manipulative, this malevolent use of Saturn-based symbols and archetypes as a way of justifying their desire for total control. And so what we end up learning, hopefully, from the book is that what we have is a tale of two golden ages. One is this ancient and beautiful golden age of mythology that was ruled over by the planet's god Saturn, and which was destroyed by an event known as Doomsday, which plunged humanity into its biggest ever crisis of survival. And we have another golden age, which is a hoped for future man-made technology-driven golden age, in which, there is an occult and transhumanist type of thinking within the elites that are propagating this idea of an upcoming new golden age, where they're attempting to initiate, a new age, a new world order, and one that is entirely designed to reflect their own elitist view of their place in the world. And that is that they are the rightful heirs to this Saturn god archetype of mythology that is such a trigger on our corporate psyche. And as a result of that, they've convinced themselves that certain groups and so on, that are involved in this kind of thinking, that they should determine humanity's future by right of their position at the top of human society. And I have to say that since I first published this book 10 years ago, I'm finding it interesting that there seems to be a renewed interest in the book's ideas since the beginning of this worldwide pandemic and the push for total control over society that seems to have come with it.
Okay.
There's certainly a flourishing of ideas, particularly in Australia. I've seen a big jump, which is probably the most egregiously, clamped down on society in terms of what we're seeing being done, in the guise of pandemic safety.
That's interesting. That's an interesting trend to notice.
I guess one of the aspects of Saturn Death Cult, which most people struggle with, of course, is this radical cosmology that positions the Earth as a satellite of an entirely different sun prior to its capture. We live in a world where science and education has so convinced us that for 4 to 5 billion years, the skies have largely been as they are, that everything, evolved, created, and was positioned where it is originally. And we've, aside from a few small fireworks here and there, it's, the skies have largely been the same. But what we're arguing in Saturn theory, and also in my book, The Saturn Death Cult, and its connection to how it has influenced mythological understanding and religions and so on down through the years, we're arguing that the ancients saw very, very different, very frightening skies, and that these skies didn't really settle down until as early as 500 BC. So it's all within the experience of human consciousness, as a corporate whole, in terms of what some people would call race memory. And usually I like to, quote one of the big names in Saturn theory, a guy called Eduardo Cardona. He's not with us anymore. But his quote sums up what is the basis of this theory as put out in books like mine, and also amongst the really hardcore Saturn theory guys who are the true cosmologists who look into this stuff. And the quote is that, and quote, "The evidence of myth which points to Saturn having once occupied a position above Earth's north polar regions is voluminous. There is not a race on Earth that has not preserved at least one account which states as much. According to this evidence, Saturn occupied a central position in the north celestial regions. It rotated and rotated widely. But other than that, it was immovable." End of quote. Now, that state of affairs, Saturn, the original sun, that life-giving sun that became associated with the god Saturn and his various names, and all the other religions, all the other mythologies worldwide, they all have a version of Saturn in their mythologies. That epoch where this planet existed in the celestial northern realms where the North Star is today, that basically finished about 6,000 years ago and initiated the changes that we now see in the world today, seasonal progression being one of the great changes, which then brings about scarcity in terms of food production and so on. This is all what has happened to the Earth since then. But that particular period of Saturn's demise, when it was pushed out by the sun to its position now in the outer realms of the solar system, where it's a mere pinprick of light to the naked human eye, that change from it being this glowing original sun and such was so destructive that, in the human psyche, a corporate psyche, there seems to have been this, great desire to get back to that day when Saturn, once ruled from its position in the north and was beneficial in terms of its existence. And the destruction of that time left such a scar on humanity, which is what we see in, world mythologies throughout the world. But it's a scar that unscrupulous people can exploit to their own ends. And that comes down to this whole idea of monopolizing productive capacity in a world of scarcity, whereby elites like the idea that they can live a golden age lifestyle while the rest of us, finance and make sure it happens for them through our hard work. And that's why I point ultimately to the greatest crime that has been committed in world history, which is the advent of a debt-based financial system that very cleverly enslaves people through debt as a means of ensuring that a small group at the top get to live that lifestyle of their choice.
Absolutely. Just a side note, do you do much talking on the Federal Reserve and that kind of stuff?
It certainly is covered. The Federal Reserve is a key component in the thesis I advance in the second half of the book, which Great. Is, to me, the great day of infamy wasn't Pearl Harbor. It was Woodrow Wilson allowing the Federal Reserve to be signed into existence and so on. But, that was just simply the capturing of the United States, probably the most blessed country resource-wise the world has ever known, which had managed to pull itself free from the British central banking model that was established with the Bank of England. And it took them nearly 100 years to get America back under their control. There was a blip in there. It wasn't a blip. It wasn't even a speed hump. It was a complete catastrophe for the elites at that time, losing America, to where they couldn't perpetrate the central banking model that France, England, and much of the Western world had been placed under. But they got there, and the last 100 years has effectively been the machinations of that group of people, perpetrating this debt-based finance system. And we are seeing the end of that finance system. It's a system that they like to collapse every now and then. They know it only has an 80 to 120 years life expectancy. So they collapse it, and then they come with their solution, which is the same old. And so on. And they've been attempting to do that this time. I'm very optimistic that things are changing. I think with the advent of the internet, we're in a Gutenberg situation, very much like the Renaissance and the Reformation were powered by the printing press. We are seeing a similar sort of a situation, and evidence of that is just simply you and me meeting like this. Even 20 years ago, this just wouldn't have happened. 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to publish a book called The Saturn Death Cult. It just would not have happened. And now we're seeing this kind of change, and it makes me very, very optimistic.
It's nice that people like us can connect, especially when you're trying to share knowledge and build up reserves of knowledge on stuff that either just doesn't exist, or maybe it's stuff like Tartaria that the history has just been whitewashed or destroyed, and it needs to be rediscovered or just discovered.
Tartaria, Khazar stuff, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's some wild stuff for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I've been aware of that through Arthur Koestler's work and so on like that. I mean, this whole idea that there is a history, there are other alternative sources that one can go and explore and one can hunt out. The internet has just, how can I say, accelerated that to light speed in terms of people being able to do that. When I was at university, you had a library, and sometimes you wanted to get a book. And, I wanted to get books from Columbia University and things like that. This would take months, where you get through the interborrowing and that. Yeah. Now, I can satisfy a whim of inquiry almost immediately, get some sort of response to put me in a direction of research and so on. It's absolutely fantastic. And as they say, the beginning of wisdom, knowledge is the beginning of all wisdom. So you increase your knowledge, you make mistakes, you get things wrong, but it's that process. And that's what I hope my book does, is it just gives people a starting point to go and follow their own ideas. It's not a book designed to say, hey, look, this is the truth. This is how it is. This is the be all end all. this is the explanation for everything that has ever been. It's just a way of letting people know that there are alternative viewpoints in this world that might be worth considering in terms of your own personal journey.
Sure. No, I respect that. Absolutely. I did a little Remembrance Day episode with a gentleman who I'd done a Canadian related episode before. And in both episodes, we just talked about a lot about how the history of the efforts and stuff that Canada has put into the world wars has just been, if not non-existent, but just, steamrolled over. And I know it's not directly what you're saying, but it's similar in the sense that, you gotta find this stuff. It's not just going to be laid out for you, and you got to understand that there's more viewpoints and more. There's so much out there. There's just so much out there, and you really got to expand your mind, and you really got to go looking for it.
Sure. And when you come to a realization that there are people out in the world who realize that what they want for themselves requires the efforts of other people that would not normally be given unless they can somehow con those people into giving those efforts. They need to be engineered into supporting what these people want to achieve for themselves. And when you realize that such people are essentially psychopathic by nature, where, the psychopath by definition just simply, you're only as good as to a person of that nature, where they can use you for what they want to achieve for themselves. In many of the interviews I've done, Jordan, I point out one factor which, for many people, the biblical reference gives the best, anchor point to go from. And that is that when I talk about this great doomsday destruction in the biblical account, that's analogous with the fall and the Garden of Eden creation myth with Adam and Eve's fall. And as a part of that fall, what they are told is that by the sweat of their brow would they make the earth yield its fruits. Whereas prior to that, they've never had to worry about going hungry. The earth had this almost sort of perpetual harvest going. And that frees people to do, amazing things when you don't have to worry about where your next meal is coming from. But when you do, there are some people out there that would rather have other people sweat in order to make the earth yield its fruits. And so they work on ways in which to make those people do exactly that. And, this is something that is a theme all the way through history, through mythology, and so on. And as I say, its culmination is the worldwide implementation of a central banking debt-based finance model, one that is cracking up now wonderfully. So it's a joy to watch. But nonetheless, the damage, people say, what's so bad about it? 2 world wars, innumerable genocides, regional warfare, profit motives that have led to, drug treatments, problems where the desire for profit means you'd rather somebody be engaged in a treatment rather than a cure. So we have all this kind of bad thinking that is financed by this debt-based model of central banking.
Yeah, that treatment rather than cure piece, that's huge. That's huge today, especially with mental health becoming such a big piece in life these days. I feel like they're swindling that treatment better than a cure into that as well.
There's a famous biblical prophecy that, is often talked about without people realizing, but it's by their sorceries have they made the nations mad. And when you look at that word sorcery, it comes from the Greek word pharmakos, where we get pharmaceutical. And I delve to some degree into the role played by the sort of the pharmaceutical industry, the drug-based world, as part of the Saturn death cultural thing. It's something that I refer to as the true understanding of what Sodom and Gomorrah was from a biblical mythological point of view. It has very little to do with sexual deviancy, according to whatever moral concern you might have on that side. Sodom and Gomorrah was very much the opioid industry, biblical style. And, it is very much a part. When I started understanding how many kids, especially in America, under the age of 6 who were on antipsychotics and antidepressants and things like that. And having had experience with a couple of those kinds of drugs in my past, they rob you of your ability to think. They have very, very detrimental effects. to one's ability to apply rational thought, to even just concentrate, to even just hold thoughts. You can sort of put stuff together, but it's that idea of being able to make connections that gets taken out of the equation when you get put on some of these more, these federal, in America, well, these industry okayed drugs and such. We're not just talking illicit opium, cocaine, marijuana, that kind of stuff. But, what they've done with regards to these other pharmaceuticals has been one of the greatest crimes also perpetuated on the world population in the modern world.
Yeah, it's slowed us down generally as a people. I agree. I mean, I've tried a few, not tried, but I've been on a few different depression and anxiety related medications. And I remember there's been a couple that really, really slowed me down mentally and affected me. And, I had the strength and the wherewithal to say, okay, I need to try something different. But some people, they just get stuck in it and they just keep taking it, and it just becomes who they are in a sense, right? Changes their mold of thinking.
My own experience was I had a neuralgic condition that was affecting the sort of top right-hand part of my jaw, going up into my temple and so on like that. And it was extreme pain and so on. And it was misdiagnosed as a neuralgia and so on and such. So they gave me a drug that was given to people with epilepsy, all right, as a way of stopping them having their epileptic fits and so on like that. Now, epilepsy was often known as what did they call it? It was sort of the divine illness. People like Julius Caesar had it. These sort of great people of history. There seems to be a huge proportion of them seem to have had epilepsy as part of their, of their issues. But these were high achievers in the world and so on. I took this drug as a way of sort of quieting the nerves that was related to neuralgia, which was what they were also trying to do with epileptics. And that was my first experience of not being able to put two ideas together to save myself, put a big dent in any writing I was doing and so on. It turned out it was a misdiagnosis. I just quite simply had bone degeneration as a result of what was needed as a root canal. But I spent 6 months on these drugs, and they had nearly a 2-year effect. And I thought to myself, if Julius Caesar had been put on these drugs,
right,
would he have, even remotely been the person in history that he turned out to have been? And, quite a few others that I've met, even people in the modern age that, have had epilepsy, that high achievers. A ballet dancer I knew, choreographer, she had a epileptic sort of stuff and that, but, extremely artistic, top of the range in what she did. If she was ever put on those kinds of drugs, I could imagine that her ideas, her capacity to generate ideas just just got vaporized. And this is by their sorceries that they made us all go mad, Wow.
That's terrible what happened to you. It sounds you definitely needed Dr. House on that one.
Yeah.
It's all better now,
I slept well during it, but
yeah.
But that's the whole thing. You just become, dopey.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You start enjoying sleep a lot more. And I mean, Oh, I hear you. Things are better now, though.
Oh, yeah.
Good. That's good. Sorry, what was the quote?
I think it's from the 18th or 17th chapters of Revelation. By their sorceries.
Oh, okay. By their sorcery. Okay.
Have they made the nations go mad? And the word sorceries is from the Greek word pharmakos.
There we go. Okay.
Where we get our word pharmaceutical from.
It's always interesting connection of words, even across countries and peoples, and it's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, Plato, I think it was Plato, that knowledge begins with the understanding of names. And where names come from, names being words, and once you start studying the origins of names, and so biblical studies is a fascination of mine, and you would be amazed what you can learn from certain stories by just simply looking at the meanings of the names given. It's that whole sort of thing from a Tarantino film, Pulp Fiction, that other people have meanings to their names, but we in the West, we just call ourselves Troy, Jordan. Nobody really knows, the origin, what these names mean. I had a Chinese friend. One of the reasons I went to Hong Kong, and he was very much aware of what his name meant, what the emphasis of his name meant. And I think in the West, we've lost that cultural understanding that names are things that help us live up to. It's a rock we can cling to as far as these things go. And of course, when we study other people's names and how they relate to historical personalities and so on, it can give you insights well and truly beyond the normal, bland historical interpretation that we get in academia today.
Yeah, no, it's you got to know your past to understand your present and link your future and sort out your future. It's very, very important stuff. I've mentioned that on the show before, so I definitely would not disagree with you on that one. Not at all.
History is one of the only true sciences out there, because science in its effect is either experiment or observation, and history is the recording of experiment and observation, the results. So, getting history right is so important. And that, that's going back to that. That's where I can see that the rewriting of history through the film industry, through Hollywood, through all these kinds of industries and so on like that, quite devastating. I was a truly big film buff. I loved Hollywood. I loved the art of filmmaking. I love looking. I watch movies, from camera angles and things like that, and I just love to understand the true greats and what they did, and the writers and so on, the telling of a story. It's the greatest entertainment medium ever created.
Sure.
But it's also being used as a tool. That you can now see the backlash against it. People in Hollywood are now just seen simply. They're not seen anymore as artists giving a performance. In terms of stuff, they're seen as mouthpieces, and they behave that way. And it's destroying, what was once a great tradition going, all the way back to Shakespeare.
Sure. Yeah. I love old school movies. Do you like the old classics? Like, I like, my favorite era, I guess you could say, is like mid 30s to the early 70s. Yeah. I love those 50s, 60s, 40s, all that stuff.
Yeah, 35 to about 70, 1970 was really my domain.
Yeah, 71, 70. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Clint Eastwood's stuff with, the Italian efforts in the spaghetti westerns being the sort of the last great, stylistic thing before you entered into the blockbuster era.
Yeah.
And so on. And
that got old fast.
Yeah. And now, the special effects era and so on, we can point to Spielberg and Star Wars and all this sort of stuff where things changed, dramatically. But at the same time, the foundations of what's rotten in Hollywood is also there in 1930s, or what you would call golden age Hollywood. I've had a very, very different appreciation of some of the old stars and their roles and what happened to them, what was going on in Hollywood during this time, this transition. And that's, one of the reasons why, so I've looked at people like Rita Hayworth. I've looked at, the effects on Brando, and, what was going on, particularly in what you would call the sort of the square-jawed heroes of John Wayne's and Jimmy Stewart's and Fondas and so on like that. And it seems that the Second World War, which pulled a lot of them into the military, and the involvement of military intelligence post-Second World War, is where the rot really set in. The realization they had a tool here that could be, that could be used and so on. And, as a result of that, the sort of the way people were used in terms of not being looked after, particularly younger people, particularly women, it all started back in those days. So the story of Rita Hayworth in particular is rather tragic, of somebody who is, who ultimately ended up in an Alzheimer's situation. It was obviously brought on by traumas relating back to her father, and the entire being used by an industry to make money, but also to, create narratives that were very different to what was her grandparents' values and thinking. Yeah, it started back then, and the military got involved. A lot of these guys were involved in the military, and from that period on, Hollywood seems to have become a psyop in terms of changing how people think.
Absolutely,
and,
Troy.
Yeah. It is tragic because there were some, great films, and the talents like Stanley Kubrick, Jay Widener with his particular take on that. It seems Kubrick was caught up originally in the whole Hollywood sort of thing. He was the wonderkind, Paths of Glory, his original film, and he got working on Spartacus.
Oh, so good! I love
Douglas and so on. Yeah, and he had these breakthrougs. But by the time he came to producing 2001, his seminal piece, Widener's idea that he was trying to alert us to something is rotten in Denmark. And, there was something very bad happening. And if you look closely, there seems to have been this transhumanist linked into pedophilia aspect that Kubrick seems to be trying to tell us. It's there, it's happening. This is what is going on. And by the time he made his last two films, it was overt, to the extent that some people believe he was knocked off after he brought in Eyes Wide Shut and AI. These films that have such incredibly, overt pointers to, elite pedophilia taking place in high society and in the Western world and so on. But yeah, it seems that he was in a way trying to warn us through his films. And there is, there are so many things about Kubrick that make him just a study in his own right. I can't emphasize enough that people should have a look at Jay Widener's work on what he's looked into Kubrick.
I'm going to check that out.
And so on. All the way from Lolita to 2001, The Shining as a commentary on the space program.
Oh yeah,
I've seen all of this sort of stuff. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I've seen the documentary on The Shining, one of them, anyways, and so many pointers to the space program. Absolutely.
Yeah,
that's an interesting one. Do you think he had something to do with? I mean, do you think we went to the moon on that occasion? And if not, do you think? What's your topic on?
My own thinking on that is that America definitely went to the moon. I think the Russians got there earlier, but it was purely military means and so on. And it was probably probes and things like that were involved in doing that. But in terms of the Apollo 11, the whole sort of Capricorn 1 movie concept of a fake moon landing, in order to, if they couldn't get there, and they just weren't able to do it, they would fake it as a way, because Kennedy had made that particular statement that they would be in the moon by the end of the decade, so they had to do it because the Russians, as the saying went in those days, their German scientists were better than our German scientists, and they were winning all the firsts in terms of space. And so the moon was the one that they had to get to. And so the idea that it was faked on a lot and so on, and that Kubrick was involved in that, and Widener believes that his payback for being involved in the special effects, which he pioneered with Dr. Strangelove. The idea is that he was involved in the special effects as a result of his work on Dr. Strangelove, and the deal he could make his own movie on his own terms. And that's why 2001 was so far ahead of its time. He had unlimited budget.
Didn't he get to use a special lens from the government or NASA or something like that? They gave him permission to use a lens.
I'm not sure the lens side of things. For me, for somebody who's worked as a cameraman, all right, there are so many things about, there's this, the flag is waving around, where's the atmosphere, all these different things that people have put together in terms of the conspiracy that look at the mechanics of it. For me, the biggest thing that is a real red flag as to what is going on are the perfect photos taken from the chest cameras of the astronauts, Aldrin and Armstrong, while on the moon. Now, to the trained eye, it's as if these guys were able to set up a tripod and stage their shots, get their perspectives, get their framing perfect every time. And that's one of the things, is that when even the top guys, whenever they out, doing a photo shoot, whether it's fashion shoot or whatever, you're lucky if you get a 10-to-1 ratio of usable shots. every shot. When I worked in television, we tried to work on a 3-to-1 ratio for news and stuff like that. But when you're doing high-end commercial work, it's often 10-to-1 in terms of 10 shots that can't be used for every one shot that's good. Well, these guys were hitting a 95% success rate with a camera that was stuck on their chest.
So basically, all these photos essentially from the moon are from these chest cameras.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
They had to. They couldn't look through the lens. All right. They were taking photos from their chest, pointing their chests.
I never heard that. I never thought of that. That's crazy. Yeah, that's ridiculous. Yeah. Okay.
All right. And subsequent moon missions, they got all the crappy photos that you would expect when you put somebody in a, if you stick a camera. I mean, just look at the footage you get from these police cams that they put on people.
Exactly.
It's terrible. It's not framed like some Hollywood level director of photography is designing every shot and getting it smooth in that. That's what you would expect on a photo basis, not video basis, but on a photo basis, to have been the case with the astronauts. And that's what happened in the subsequent moon landings. So there was one good photo out of every 10. In the Armstrong, Aldrin, and the Apollo 11 stuff, we're talking 9 good photos out of every 10. And for me, that was a big red flag in terms of what I understood, how difficult it is to get those frame shots. And it just made me think, those photos are so good. It would not surprise me if it was Kubrick, given that he was the ultimate, director of photography in filmmaking. It would not surprise me if he was the one that was, organizing those shots. And, there's been a couple of other things. Widener's gives some very, very detailed analysis of why you get prismatic effects, where you get light being broken into its constituent colors and so on like that, how that happens. People, Richard Hoagland, these kinds of people believe that they found glass structures on the moon and that these created prismatic effects and so on like that.
Okay.
Widener's got a much more interesting idea, and that is that they were using a back projection technique with a material 3M had put out, which was this millions of glass bubbles, minute glass bubbles. Do you remember at the beginning of 2001, you have the scenes of the primitive hominids on the plains of Africa, and they have the big bone fight, and the bone goes up, and you see that those grand vistas that are actually Spain in the background and such. That was all back projection with guys in monkey suits and so on like that to create it. They didn't go and film that there and so on, but it was so far ahead of old style back projection. And it was based on the idea of these minute glass beads that you put onto a film, like it's a piece of sandpaper almost. And it's so perfect that it just creates this beautiful depth of field and so on. Very short-lived piece of technology, because blue screen came in pretty much after that, and it just took over the way people did. Back projection was gone. But every now and then you get one of these pieces of glass will be out of sync with all the other pieces of glass in the film thing. And if the camera comes along, you'll get that prismatic breakdown of light that will happen and so on like that. And that's what Jay Widener believes happens in the photos and the film footage that show the prismatic effects, the rainbow effects that you get, that this is what was happening on the back projection in Kubrick's, in Kubrick's set that he had built for 2001. And such. Now, that's Jay Widener's theory, and I think it's very plausible. I think it's very much a part of that. And, he goes on to say that his reworking of The Shining, which is nothing like Stephen King's The Film, is, Kubrick's way of basically highlighting, the way that the Gemini program and then later on the Apollo program and so on was, the effect it had on the psyche of the American population and so on like that. So Jack Nicholson's character is the American population, the symbol of the American population going slightly crazy with everything that they're seeing and so on like that. But the symbols are all there. If you take it from Jay Widener's analysis, I think it's well worth anybody having a look, just out of interest.
That's crazy. That's interesting stuff. Yep, I'm gonna have to look at that for sure. Can you explain a bit? I know you touched on it very briefly, but can you explain a bit this electric universe And this electric universe theory. That's very, very interesting.
Right. Okay. So the electric universe is a completely different model of how the universe works compared to the Newtonian, Einstein, gravity-only driven model, in which gravity is the only force at work, with small amounts of electromagnetism and so on like that. But gravity is what holds everything together. And to put it in perspective, when the gravity model is looked at and you look into space at the observable masses in the universe that we can see, planets, stars, all these different objects that are seen, the gravity driven model has a big failing, and that is that you cannot see the required mass to explain why everything is actually working as it should work, as it is working, why, observed. In other words, you're missing 95% of the mass needed for the solar system, the galaxies and so on to work as they are working. And this is why mainstream science has developed a thing called black holes and dark matter and dark energy. It's literally saying that 95% of the gravity that is required, the mass to produce the gravity that is required, can't be seen because it's this dark energy, this black holes and so on. And if we add in and say it's there, but we can't see it, then everything works according to our model. All right. Now, what the electric universe does is that it takes gravity as a small force in the universe, and it supplants it with the force of electromagnetism, electrical energy. And the conduit for electrical energy throughout the universe is a thing called plasma. And that 95% of mass that is missing in the gravitational model is taken up in the electric universe model with this stuff called plasma. And plasma is a fantastic conduit for electrical forces. And to give people, because it's very difficult in sort of a radio type of situation to describe through words what's going on. But we've all seen those NASA images of space where they bring out the colors and you've got the nebulas and so on like that. And it's what's called false color imagery. Space doesn't actually look like that to the human eye. What it is that the instruments are picking up plasma and energies flowing through the plasma that they refer to as ionized gas. And they just simply assign colors to different levels of energy that is being picked up by their instruments. And that's why you get these almost, psychedelic type, color displays that are fantastic to look at. But from an electric universe principle, what you're actually looking at is the flow of electricity throughout the universe. And in plasma is a substance. It's the fourth state of material. You've got gas, solid, and liquid being the three states that we know, in empirical science. But plasma is what often called the fourth state, this idea of ionized gas, electrified gas. And plasma has three modes: dark mode, glow mode, and arc mode. And we see most of what we see in space in these false color images is plasma in dark mode, where they've bumped up the energy so we can see it. You don't see that with the naked eye. But you do see plasma every now and then when electrical excitement takes place go into glow mode. For instance, Northern Lights, this kind of effect that you see, auroras, this sort of thing is plasma in glow mode, according to the electric universe model. Arc mode happens when those electric transmission lines that all this plasma sort of facilitates, when it goes into high electrical stress, it goes into arc mode, and lightning is a classic example of plasma in arc mode. We see it in the atmosphere. You even see it in space. You certainly see it in terms of in the electric universe model, wherever you see, incandescent, what people think are basically controlled nuclear explosions. In the electric universe model are electrostatic phenomena where you've got arc mode, electrical short circuiting taking place. And that basically defines what a star is in the electric universe model. Now, the guy who is really the father of all of this is a guy called Christian Birkeland, who in his experiments is what is called a torello, which was a metal ball What he showed was that by running electrical current through these metal balls in a controlled environment, in a laboratory environment, he was able to show how you could produce aurora effects at the poles of these metal balls. And these aurora effects were so very, very similar to what was seen in what we call the northern lights and the aurora that we see on Earth today and on other planets. Saturn in particular, Jupiter has it. They all have these kind of aurora effects. I think even Mars occasionally gets it. But certainly the planets with magnetospheres certainly have these aurora effects. And Christian Birkeland, over 100 years ago, showed how this could be done by pumping electricity through a metal ball, like a metal core, like supposedly our Earth's core is supposed to be. And science said, wow, this is great, except where is the electricity coming from? And they rejected Christian Birkeland's ideas because they could not conceive where the electricity was being pumped from. For them, the Earth generates its own electrical current to create its magnetosphere through what they believe is a dynamo effect with a molten core. They can't reproduce this in a lab, but they totally rejected the idea of electrical current flowing in the Earth through other means. And what Birkeland was saying was that the Earth is connected to the sun through these currents. All right. Basically, out of the south pole of the sun comes a current of plasma that connects in with the Earth's south pole. It goes through the planet and exits out the North Pole and then back into the North Pole of the sun. It's a circuit, and so on. And depending on how active that circuit is in terms of the electrical overload or flow through that, depends on whether you see, aurora or even how our atmosphere works. Earthquakes is another factor. A lot of people in the electric universe say earthquakes are effectively lightning underground as a result of this current. So what drives the sun? The sun is connected to the galactic current circuit, and the galactic circuit was first proposed by Hannes Alfvén. Hannes Alfvén was a Swedish physicist who won the Nobel Prize for understanding how plasma works in terms of, the cosmos and so on like that. He developed concepts based on electromagnetism, because wherever you've got magnetism, and we've all put our compass and we see it pointing to the north, that's an effect of magnetism going on there. Magnetism is always the result of electrical current. All right. So if you put an electric current through a nail for a period of time, it will magnetize that nail. When the electric current is turned off, the nail remains magnetized. That's how you create magnets.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
Okay. So you just take, ferrous metal, you wrap some copper around it, put both ends of the copper to a battery, and you'll turn that ferrous piece of metal into a magnet. Okay, so the idea of electromagnetism, Hannes Alfvén and so on, the mainstream science said, okay, we'll go with the idea that electromagnetism happened in billions of years ago, and all magnetism is kind of this frozen skeleton of what took place, like that piece of metal that happened. And unfortunately for Hannes Alfvén, this was sort of one of the great disasters of how people interpreted his work, because as he said, no, it's ongoing, it's continuing. And he proposed the galactic circuit, in which galaxies are essentially giant homopolar motors that run electric current through their north and south pole, in the same way that a unimotor, a homopolar polar electric motor works, and so on. And this is one of the reasons that galaxies often take a spiral configuration, and why you also see these jets at the center of galaxies that mainstream science tells us are black holes. You get these light jets that go, that shoot up from the North Pole and out from the South Poles of the center of the galaxy, and along the disk at the equatorial part of the galaxy, you get these beautiful spiraling patterns. And one of the great problems that mainstream science has with its gravity-only driven model is that the galaxies in their spiral form, the stars that are closest to the center should be traveling fastest. you've seen how whirlpools, water going down a plug hole works and so on. All right. The water gets faster as it gets closer to the plug hole. But the stars on the outer part of the galaxy are actually going faster than the stars at the inner part of the galaxy. And this makes no sense in a gravity-driven only thing, but it makes perfect sense in a electrically powered galactic circuit. So in the electric universe, the galaxies that we see are giant electrical motors, and the connections, the wires of these electric motors and so on, are the plasma Birkeland currents that Christian Birkeland discovered in his experiments that connect all these celestial bodies together according to these electrical principles. And of course, it's this thinking, particularly when you understand that plasma goes through its dark mode, glow mode, and its arc mode, that ultimately comes to explain what the ancients were seeing in days when we say in Saturn theory that Saturn was originally placed at the north of the Earth, and the Earth was connected electrically to that body. Basically, there was a string, think of a string as a string of pearls arrangement, north to south, Saturn at the top, Mars next, and then Earth, and later Venus is inserted between Mars and Earth. And this lasts for a period of time known as the Saturnian Golden Age, when Saturn was in that position at the celestial north. And the effects that we see, this giant connecting glow mode and sometimes arc mode Birkeland current that connected Saturn with Earth at that time, is what we, hypothesize was behind so much of the mythological symbolism, so much of the imagery that you see with mythology, from squatter men to stairways to heaven to trees of life to, Mount Olympus and so on, and the abode of the gods where the Lord of the Rings lived at the very top. This is what drives this imagery, and the electric universe explains this very well. That's why Saturn theory is a subset of the electric universe, because you don't see that configuration very much in the universe today. But it is only the electric universe that can explain what mythology is telling us the ancients saw, if you assume that the ancients were actually looking at natural phenomena.
That's some interesting stuff. So the electric universe model and the Saturn theory, they kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, Saturn theory is a subset. Okay, so guys like Velikovsky sort of first started, in terms of his idea that Velikovsky is very much sort of post the Saturnian system breakup. He was looking more at what was happening in history when the planets Venus and Mars were having close encounters with Earth, and how people experienced that through the mythological record, their recordings of their experiences, whether it's the biblical Exodus accounts to what was happening in Egyptian mythology, to Greek mythology, and so on. And Velikovsky, people poo-pooed this idea of planets coming close to each other because they were in a gravity-only driven world. And Velikovsky was proposing even back then that there were electrical differences between celestial bodies, and that these electrical differences, when electrical fields come into contact, stronger electric fields will overload and short circuit weaker electric fields. That's just a fact. That's what happens when you pump too much juice through a wire that can't, that only handles 5 amperes, and you're sticking 1,000 amperes through it, you're going to get a meltdown. And effectively, this is what Velikovsky was saying was going on between planetary bodies with their different electrical properties. And mainstream science said this is a joke. You don't get charge separation in space. It can't happen. We don't know where all this electricity is coming from. But he put the idea on the map that electrical forces really played a part in how the solar system is held together. And of course, he was proven correct. So even mainstream scientists will tell us today that the sun is positively charged to the planets and so on like that. They accept that. They just don't accept that these electrical properties have a greater effect than gravity. They haven't reached that stage yet, but they have accepted electrical differences in terms of the charge of these different celestial bodies. So Velikovsky sort of had this idea of electrical properties and how that created a lot of what you call the thunderbolts, the electrical lightning, all this kind of stuff that you see in mythology being thrown around, which he claimed was natural phenomena and so on like that. And people later on, they took up on this. And after Velikovsky died, more people started looking at the role of Saturn. And the reason they started looking at Saturn was because while Jupiter and the Sun are the big boys for the latter part of this reappraisal of history, solar system history, it seems mythology is telling us that Saturn was the biggest at the beginning as far as Earth was concerned. And so looking more closely at what's called the Saturn myth produced this idea that everybody sort of who's involved in this kind of research, Earth must have been the satellite of Saturn. All right. Velikovsky had never actually come to that idea at that stage, but guys like Talbot and Wallace Thornhill, Cardona, and a number of others started to look at the Saturn thing and started to propose models for how Saturn could have actually been this sun that the myths tell us it was, this ringed sun that the ancients saw, so much so that they knew Saturn had rings. You see, this is the thing, all right? The ancients knew Saturn had rings, but in the modern world, we didn't discover that until Galileo's telescope. They also knew that Jupiter had rings, and we only discovered that 30 years ago, that Jupiter actually has rings. So there's only two explanations. Either they had better technology than us, or they saw these planets a lot closer than they are today. Those are the only two explanations. So we went with the idea in Saturn theory, they had to have seen these planets a lot closer. And there are a number of models that have been proposed and a lot of debate in Saturn theory. A lot of people have very different ideas. I have gone with the Eduardo Cardona sort of idea of what is called the axial aligned configuration, that the planet Saturn had this rather bizarre configuration with its satellites as it was being captured, where both Mars and later Venus, but Mars and Earth were strung below it, and they were in axial alignment and rotation with Saturn as that system of planets was being captured by the sun. And this is called the polar configuration. And so I'm largely a follower of Cardona's approach to this. There are other ideas. Some people have a concept called a dumbbell. There's the concept of the phase lock configuration and so on like that. And for people who want to go into this kind of, look into this kind of stuff, if you go to the Thunderbolts group, thunderbolts.org people, you can look at all the various ideas within Saturn theory. What's at the heart of this is that Saturn was a brown dwarf star that was captured by the sun as early as 15,000 years ago, 10 to 15,000 years ago. It was captured by the sun, and it had Earth and Mars as its satellites at that time. And the capture process so overloaded this brown dwarf star that it flared up into a sun that then shone in Earth's northern celestial realms in a very beneficial way for an unspecified period of time that's called the Golden Age. It can be anything from 2,000 to 8,000 years long. But it shone at that time and then was catastrophically displaced in an event called Doomsday in the mythologies, where Saturn was pushed out to the outer realms. Jupiter played a part in that. Mars and Venus ran amok and, became very erratic in terms of their orbits around the sun as each planet tried to find its own position now around its new sun, this equatorial sun. And it was that doomsday erratic period that, really set the, set the agenda for later groups in terms of associating Saturn with a better time than the one that we currently, this age of scarcity that we've been living in since then.
Before we start wrapping up, can you describe a bit about this cult, the Saturn death cult? So you've described the electric universe theory and then the Saturn theory. So what is this cult, and what is their purpose? And give us the rundown on that, Troy.
Okay. Well, to understand that, you have to understand what mythology is telling us about Saturn in terms of its career, for want of a better word. During the capture, what happens is that you have a period of time what's called the Purple Dawn by mythology. It's what my second book is, a speculative look at what the Earth maybe looked like under a purple dawn, which is life under a brown dwarf star, where you're encapsulated in a plasma bubble according to electric universe principles. You don't see the outer world. You're in this kind of existence where it's great for plants. It's a uniform environment, climate, and food grows and so on. Problem is, you have no way of telling time. There's nothing to reference time. So when you fall asleep, you don't know whether you sleep 5 hours, 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 years. You have no idea. And so family groups, it's very difficult when you don't have the concept of time, the ability to calculate the passage of time. You can't really develop a civilization. And what happens is that when this brown dwarf star with its insular plasma bubble, its satellite inside with people on there, totally unaware of what's going on in the greater cosmos, when it hits the heliosphere of the sun, it short circuits, it loses that bubble. And suddenly two things happen. Humanity on the planet can suddenly see the greater cosmos, the stars, or Milky Way, whatever you want to describe it as such. Big shock to the system. The other thing that is huge is that the little glowing red magenta disk that had always glowed from the same spot in the sky suddenly flares up in this bright, bright light that bathes the world in this brilliant light that is so different from what they had before, this dusky purple dawn, this semi-nocturnal existence. And it changes everything, because in so doing, as things develop, as you get that moment, which in biblical terms is called the let there be light moment, in terms of the biblical version of this creation myth, when you get that moment, humans suddenly, over a period of time, literally, to not to create a pun on it or whatever, they start to understand what the passage of time is. And with the understanding of the passage of time comes the concept of weights and measures. All right. And weights and measures, which time is the first, but then you've got, distance and volume and all the other things that come with it and so on like that. These things allow humans to start to build. Hey, I'll see you here according to those rings around Saturn. When they pass 3 times, I'll see you back here to, and I'll bring this and you bring that and we'll build this. And so civilization is born. And it is attributed to Saturn, this bursting forth of light, this ability. Without that bursting forth of light, humanity did not have these weights and measures with which to now progress to the idea of civilization. And what I argue is that during the Golden Age, when Saturn is still in that position in the north, humanity underwent a great age of discovery. They didn't have to worry about food. They didn't have to, the earth was still producing. They didn't have to worry about financing stuff or whatever like that. They could just explore the world. This is what is meant by setting the bounds of creation and so on like that. They discover astronomy. They discover all kinds of things that we take for granted. And this lasts for a period of time, and it is a great period of time because there is a lack of want. There's no scarcity in terms of food production or even needing to clothe oneself and so on. You've got a civilization that seems to be dedicated purely to this mapping out the whole of creation, an entirely new concept for humanity to experience. And then that all gets destroyed. It gets destroyed as the Saturnian system of planets, Saturn, Mars, and Venus also having been born at that time and shining like a bright light behind Mars, and Earth, the system starts to break up. And along with that breakup, you start entering into, you have the catastrophic doomsday event, which brought about floods, the Atlantis myth, what the Bible talks about, the fall from Eden, and so on like that. But and various other mythologies, everything has a variation of this. But after that event, you are now confronted with a world of scarcity. And we were talking about this before. By the sweat of your brow, you'd make the earth yield its fruits. And for most people, what was lost was so traumatic in their experience that all they wanted to do, they just hoped for a return back to this time when there was no want for anything. You could spend your life just, mapping the world out, exploring, living a great life. Suddenly now you had to plan to make sure you could eat next week. You had to plan, you had to create industry to do so. And the only way that you could create industry was to, utilize the concepts of weights and measures. And it is these weights and measures that were bequeathed by the advent of Saturn bursting into light, going into a nova situation, that people tried to remember, tried to preserve, and created priesthoods that were geared towards the idea of maintaining these weights and measures so that society could use them to progress, to continue to progress, and maybe deal with this phenomenon called scarcity or seasonal scarcity that had now happened now that Saturn had been knocked from his position in the abode of the gods, and things had been replaced by this east to west setting sun that shone with a different light, and vegetation of the planet started turning green and so on like that. And you had, as I said, you had scarcity. And so they looked for measures and such to help society create the surplus needed to survive the scarcity. And this is where you get this element in humanity that every race, every culture has, that decides, I don't want to do the work. I'm not going to pitch in. I want everybody to work for me. And I'm going to enjoy a life like they had in the golden age because you lot are going to work to do that. But how do you convince people to do that? There's a number of ways. You can, create a weapon and say, if you don't do it, I'm going to kill you all. And so people buckle down. But when you need 20 or 30 people, at some point, somebody goes, hey, there's more of us than him. All right, I can take him out. And so on. We don't need to worry about that. So you have to find a system that hoodwinks people into, if you don't follow what we're saying, you won't get the benefits from the god in terms of building surpluses in this world of scarcity. And so religions build up a series of rituals and understanding in which priesthoods claim that they can somehow influence the god that had brought about the destruction. You got to remember that Saturn was destroyed, killed by Zeus, all that sort of stuff, but it was still out there in the outer realms in terms of being observed and so on. And so there's this idea of a return of Saturn and a new golden age. But we need to be able to influence this god who seems to be capricious in his nature, just suddenly destroyed all of creation, everything we built up. And we need to be able to influence this god through ritual and so on like that, so he looks favorably on us while killing other people if doomsday should ever happen again. And so the threat of doomsday is the great control mechanism that these priesthoods have, that if Saturn had killed us once before in doomsday, if we don't do the right thing by Saturn, he'll kill us again, and he won't look favorably on our attempts to create a surplus and so on like that. And so this is where the priesthoods and the religions start to get these different ideas where men are, running programs where people are looking to them and saying, well, they seem to know their knowledge. They've got the symbols, because the symbols, this is Jungian archetypes, they have a triggering effect. Here's a guy with a particular symbol. He must be in with the knowledge. We'll follow him. And that way, we'll get the crumbs, but we will survive. And hopefully when doomsday comes again, somehow we'll be overlooked and we'll survive. And the power that this gives the priesthoods builds and builds, and ultimately develops into priest kings, which ultimately develops into royalty, and down through the ages where you have elites always looking to control the vast majority of people, to give the elites the kind of power, prestige, and lifestyle that reflects this connection with the Saturn archetype. And it literally comes back down to that sort of idea that, hey, these guys seem to have it all. They must be onto something. You know what I mean? It's kind of a self-perpetuating, effect on people. And, we tend to give credence to those who are driving the Rolls Royce. Well, they're successful. They must have, they had it. These guys are living in a big temple. They must be doing the right thing. Let's follow them. And over time, the archetypes that become symbols play their part in maintaining the power base for a lot of these this way of thinking, this culture, and so on, that develops around these archetypes. And it fluctuates. The Nazi Germany, they used archetypes, the black sun, all that kind of stuff. The swastika is a Saturnian symbol through and through. It's derived from Buddhism, which is their version of the Saturn symbol, and such like that. Okay, so they use those symbols and things like the lightning bolts, which is the twin lightning bolts, which is the thunderbolts of Jupiter, and so on like that.
Sure.
You try creating a revolution in these times without this kind of symbolism, you don't get very far. Communism has developed it. The hammer and sickle is really a variation of the star inside a crescent, of the a classic Saturnian symbol that is based on the effect of the planet Venus, or the Venus god. It's been the abode of gods, Venus, Mars, and Saturn being the three main gods, the family, so to speak.
Wow, that's wild, Troy.
Some
wild stuff.
Once you know this stuff, all right, and you start seeing, why is it that, we were talking about Kubrick and the Apollo program. Think of the symbolism that was involved in that. Apollo, the Saturn rocket, all of these things. Look at NASA's, it's like if you look at all the successful companies, you can find a derivative of Saturnian, Venus, Martian symbolism in mythology that, puts them in. It's almost as if that's what they have to do to get into the club. And so,
okay. Yeah. Sure.
And of course, the clincher is, why did the Federal Reserve feel it needed to stick a pyramid with the all-seeing eye on the dollar symbol, as a symbol on the dollar, to establish the world currency? Why do you need those Saturnian incantations and symbols on a piece of paper that is really just simply an IOU and such like that? But they needed to do it. It's because it has this deep-seated subconscious psychological effect on the psyche of most people when they see that is associated with authority, with the Saturn archetype, which is authority. The tragedy is that the Saturn archetype is capricious. It is an archetype that can kill you, but can also elevate you, and so on. And so the cults that are involved in this, who really do believe in the demerge and variations of Saturn, most of them don't understand it from the position I'm speaking from. They don't have that idea. All they know is that there is a creative force that created a golden age, that then somehow engineered a doomsday, and we're coming through from that time in doomsday, and that force is still there in the universe, and their objective is to somehow find a way to influence that creative force. And that's what makes it so different from world religions like Christianity and even Islam and so on like that, because the Christian idea is a God of justice, all right, where there are immutable laws that even God cannot contravene, okay? The Saturnian archetype of the occult way of thinking is that it is not a God of justice. It's a God of capricious nature who can be influenced by whatever might come to mind at the time. It's a God who's not creating a judgment day. There's only doomsday when he gets up out of bed the wrong way, on the wrong side of the bed, and decides, I've had it. I'm done with creation for this time. I'm going to destroy it all. You want to be, according to the Saturn death cult or the occult type thinking, you want to be in a position to say, okay, you're going to destroy that, but, give me a break and let me survive it through, and, we'll rebuild it on the other side. Christian, Buddhist, Taoist, Islamic, Judaism, and so on, speaks more of a God that doesn't destroy creation, but judges creation to bring it back into harmony. And that's the fundamental difference between this culture. And that's why you get politicians and a culture in the world today with corporate leaders, politicians, where they're not driven by doing what is right, what is righteous, what is justice. They're driven by the idea that I've got influence and I can make this go the way I want it to go. I can determine the narrative and I can decide what's right and what's wrong according to whatever the narrative is. And the Saturnian archetype feeds that mentality. Whereas the world religions, the politician who's honest goes, no, I have to be accountable to certain immutable laws, 10 Commandments, whatever it is, Hammurabi's laws, these kinds of things. And they are sacrosanct. But we live in a world today where the people who have gained control are the ones who simply believe it's about deciding the narrative, not about justice according to immutable laws. And so they will decide what's right and wrong and determine that almost as they go along, because they are the heirs to the Saturnian archetype that says God can turn on a dime and be a killer one day and a beneficial creator, giver of life another day, but I'm going to have influence with that God, and so on. The Christian idea is that we rely on the exercise of true justice, where we know the laws, we know the rules, we know the weights and measures, and we can say what is right and wrong according to these in religious terms, God-given laws. And that's the fundamental difference between the two types of thinking.
Wow, Troy, that's cool, man. I've written down a few things for us to consider talking about next time. But yeah, man, that's great. I enjoyed that. Again, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Honestly, the pleasure's all mine.
Oh, I mean, hey, I'm not going to argue with you, but I mean, we'll agree to disagree on that. How's that sound? The pleasure's mine for sure. I'll pull up your website. Is there anything that you'd like to share with my viewers before we go?
Just, I would say just that I have a very optimistic viewpoint of where things are going in the world today. I don't believe that what I call the Saturn death cult, I believe it's on its last legs. I think most of us are not yearning for a time where we live a lifestyle on the backs of others, where they're controlled, absolutely controlled. Most of us are just simply wanting a world where the rules are applied to everybody, so you know where you stand with regards there's an old Christian canard that has been taken so out of context and has caused so many problems for many people. It's called spare the rod and spoil the child. When I was growing up, all the people took that to mean that when I got out of line, I got a good caning. They take a rod and give me a good whipping, from behind and so on like that. And that's what I grew up in school with. I learned that the rod means a measure. The real meaning of the understanding is if you don't give the child the measure of what's right and what's wrong, you spoil them. They don't have that capacity to be able to function in society. And so we have to all get back to that stage where we are all confident in the weights and measures and rules that govern our society, so that we know, not hope, so that we know that when we come to dispute with somebody that or some organization or something, that we will be treated fairly. There won't be favor for those who have influence. And this is what I keep talking about with the Saturn death cult. They are people who believe in having influence. They build up influence. It doesn't matter whether they're right or wrong. If they got more influence than you go down. We want a world where the lowest knows that he can take on the highest, and they will be judged accordingly to a set of rules that is equal. And I think that's where we're moving in the world today. And I would hope that, your viewers, your listeners, take that as a positive factor in what they're seeing in the world. It looks pretty dark in the way things are going, but we're just seeing these people for what they are. They're a bunch of influencers who are seeking to control society through influence, and not by giving us, they tell us one thing one day and another thing another day, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's the war in Afghanistan, whether it's the way the economy is going or something. You're never given a set of rules and measures by which you can judge for yourself. And we need that. And I think we're heading towards that.
Okay. I appreciate the positivity. That's wonderful. That's good stuff. So again, I'll pull your website up here, Saturn Death Cult. So you can get the Kindle book on Amazon, correct? All your books available on Amazon?
They're all available on Amazon, only Amazon as Kindle.
Okay.
There's no print. It's too expensive because of the color imagery.
Sure.
That's involved. It's one of the things I like people to understand, is that understanding the cosmology is as much about looking at diagrams as it is about spoken word. So I've put a lot of effort into illustrating the points that we've been talking about. And you can go to my website and get a basic idea. There's a lot on the website that's in the book, but the book has been pretty much expanded to include a lot of other stuff, particularly on the symbolism side.
Wonderful. Okay, that's great. So again, thank you so much for coming in, Troy. Enjoy the rest of your night, my friend. I'll definitely be in touch with you about coming back. I definitely want our paths to cross again. It was so nice connecting with you and speaking with you. I appreciate meeting people like yourself.
The pleasure's all been mine. Thank you very much.
Right on, my friend. Okay, all the best to you, Troy. And we'll be talking soon, okay?
Indeed.
Okay, take care, my friend. Bye-bye.